Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibis, it's Saturday. I'm home. You can see the familiar backdrop and not the backdrop of a hotel room. Feels good to be home. Short trip, though. I'm back to Walterboro tomorrow night to begin covering week 2 of the Alec Murdaugh trial. It's been an amazing week. It's been full of learning, full of fun with meeting new people and enlightening in the case. We've already learned some new things. So today I'm going to cover yesterday's testimony. That's how it's going to go while I'm there. That way, as soon as court ends, I can just hit the road and get home. And when I get home, it's like I just want to hang with my family. So Saturday episodes for this. I'm going to try to keep up on cases that I've been covering before the trial started. Sometimes it's crazy time-wise, but I know there were some filings in Lori Vallow's case. I'm hoping to maybe get to those tomorrow night when I get back to Walterboro. So anyways, all right. First and foremost, I got to show you some of my alibis from yesterday. They were able to get into the courtroom and listen to testimony. Just the sweetest people. I tell you, all my listeners rock. I love all y'all. I say it all the time, but I do. These ladies were just so sweet and can't wait to meet some more. I've got some more coming in town to sit in. So yeah, shoot me a message when you're coming in. All right. Music fact of the day, B.B. King. I mean, he's just Mr. Blues. His mom forbid him to sing the blues, by the way, when he was young, calling it the devil's music. But who was B.B. King's favorite singer of all time? Old Blue Eyes, Frank Sinatra. He said nobody could sing a ballad with more tenderness than Frank Sinatra. There you go. I want to give a big thank you to my sponsor of the week, Base. Go check them out, guys. I've been using this bag going down to Walterboro, and it rocks. It rocks. It rocks. It's not expensive. That's the thing for a good bag that you're going to use frequently. It's 15% off with the code WhatTheWorld. You'll go to beis.com/whattheworld, or no, it's beistravel.com/whattheworld, 15% off. I have the weekender bag, the full size, man. I can fit so much stuff in there. It's amazing. All right, let's hop into testimony. So the first witness was Detective Laura Retland, who's with the Criminal Investigation Division of Colleton County. She arrived on the scene at 12:22 a.m. and she prepped the search warrant for the property, and she was kind of the liaison for the senior SLED agent. Now, remember, SLED is kind of like South Carolina's version of like the FBI. It's our state law enforcement division. They investigate all the big crimes in the state. They're based out of Columbia. So she was asked if she knew Alec Murdaugh and his family, but she did not. She said when she went to the kennel, she noticed an overwhelming smell, lots of water as well. She approached Paul and saw obvious trauma. He was covered with a sheet, but she could see his brain, blood, hair, skull all over the feed room, the ceiling, the floor. Trigger warning, this does involve graphic stuff. This is broadcast on TV, so I'm going to put it on here. It's true crime. It ain't pretty. But I know some people are very sensitive. So a lot of these episodes are going to have very sensitive material. And I understand people have their reasons that they don't want to listen. And I understand. So body matter was covering items all over the feed room, things on the shelves, and there was blood on that sidewalk as well. The window had some holes in it where some of the shots went through, and she noticed that as well. Maggie was covered with a blanket. She did see some shell casings in front of Maggie's head. She located Alex standing behind a vehicle with his brother. John Marvin came on scene, as we know. She saw the flat footwear impressions around that old hanger. We're going to get to that. But Maggie's clearly made a path around that old hanger, walked one length of it and then back the other. You can see the flat footwear impression there. To the left on the picture are the actual sandals that Maggie had on that night. By the way, I have a lot of new listeners. Welcome aboard. If you are a podcast listener and not YouTube, I always put a link in the description where you can go see the pictures that I put up on the YouTube version. YouTube, if you haven't subscribed, do it now. Hit subscribe, like the videos, hit the bell button for any updates that I put out. I'll be doing some more shorts this next week now that I'm a little more comfortable with what I'm doing. So that way you won't miss a thing. All right, back to it. Sorry, I should have done it at the beginning, but y'all know my brain if you've been with me for a hot minute. She saw those footwear impressions and that they overlapped. So she walked the length of the prints to see where they went. They stopped at the end of that building and came back. Other than the boots of law enforcement, there were no other foot impressions that they saw there. And she sat in on that interview with Alec in the cop car at the scene. That started around 12:57 a.m. Now, here is a photo of, on the top of this is them in the car. Alec was in the front seat. As you can see, the bottom picture is body cam footage of that second officer on scene when he was being interviewed with Sergeant Green. So Alex said, when I came back, I could see them. I knew it was bad. His brains. I could see his brains. Now, he appeared to be very emotional throughout the day in court, especially when it came to any kind of testimony about Maggie or Paul's condition or photos of the crime scene. And I can't see his face. I had a great shot yesterday of where I was sitting right on the end. I could see him. I could see Buster and the family, but he kind of rocks back and forth very gently, pretty much the whole time. You can see his shoulder shaking. He puts his head down, shakes his head no a lot, scratches his head a lot. So I just try to look at him. I look at the jury, and the jury so far seems very, very engaged, by the way. We do have a couple of nodders, though, and I think that may be why the judge calls these little stand breaks. I figured it out yesterday. We do have a couple that seem to get a little bit sleepy, especially after lunch. So I kind of theorize maybe that's why Judge Newman calls those little stand breaks that last 2 to 3 minutes, and we all appreciate them, guys. The seats in this courtroom, so they're fabric, but they have these buttons, and they're like that big, and they hit you right on your tailbone, and everybody's talked about it. We all gonna have a little round bruise right there on the base of our booties. It is so uncomfortable. So what do? I take my puffy jacket and sit on it. So back to what Alec said in the car. He says he thinks he tried to turn Paul over first, and then he ran over to Maggie. He said when he tried to turn Paul over, Paul's cell phone popped out of his pocket, which is weird. I've turned my kids over when we've been on the floor tickling or playing or whatever. Nobody's cell phones just popped out of their pocket. He said, I tried to do something with it, but I put it down really quickly. I went to my wife and I could see, and then the officer interrupts and says, did you touch her? And he says, I did. I touched them both as limited as possible to take a pulse. So he called 911. Said the dispatcher was very good. He said he told her he needed to hang up and call family. He said he called Randy and John Marvin. And I believe he tried to he called Buster. Earlier, he said he went to see his mom because she gets very anxious when his dad is not there. Remember, his mom is in end-stage Alzheimer's, and his dad was very sick in the hospital. In fact, died 3 days after the murders. He said Maggie was a dog lover, and she's frequently down at that kennel. He called and texted her when he left to see his mom with no response. He said he came back to the house, and that's when he saw Paul and Maggie. Paul was setting up to plant their sunflower seeds. That's why Paul was there that day. He said his and Maggie's relationship was good, and his and Paul's was as good as it could be. Now, we've heard differently. We've heard speculation that maybe she was going to file for divorce. And also there is that text the night where she allegedly texted a friend and said, this is fishy. He's up to something. But maybe we'll get to that at some point in the trial. When asked about any problems, he said Paul had been in the boat crash. He had been arrested and charged. He said there was a lot of negative publicity about it, especially people online. There was a lot of vile stuff written. He says when Paul was out and about, he was punched and hit and attacked a lot. He didn't know who would do it to him, but he got direct threats all the time. And then he said all the time. So when asked what the threats were, Alex said, people said they'd beat his butt. He said at college, when he goes out, he got threatened. He said, I can ask his friends and get more information. And on the hour-long question and answer yesterday on Law and Crime, by the way, we talked about the lack of cameras or surveillance cameras around the Moselle property. And I thought it was interesting because Paul's been getting threatened. He's being physically attacked. And it makes you wonder, why would you not put a lot of surveillance on that property? Because clearly, according to Alec, Paul was a target. And I've read some of the comments online shortly after the boat crash. People were angry and felt like he would get off with the death of Mallory Beach, where he was driving drunk in that boat. Alex said, this is stupid, and I'm embarrassed to say it. I just hired a guy here. He killed the sunflowers in the field, and he told Paul when he was in high school, he got in a fight with a black guy, and the FBI put him on an undercover team with Navy SEALs, and their job was to kill radical Black Panthers from Myrtle Beach to Savannah. He told Paul sometime that the week before Paul was murdered. That's the weirdest story ever. Alex said, I don't think he's the person that did this, but he was off today because he had to take his dad to the doctor, and his name is CB Rowe. He said, I left his message. He said he had called Alec that day and left a message, and he said he called him when he was on his way to his mother's house. And he said, I think him and Paul got along very well. And he said Paul was so taken aback by the story that he told him about him being some hitman for the FBI that he recorded parts of it, bits and pieces of that conversation. When the officer asked how Paul was handling all of the stress from the boat crash and the threats, he said, I've never been prouder of him, the way he's handled the pressures and adversity in that situation. Paul is a wonderful, wonderful kid. He can do almost anything, and he gets along with almost anybody. He said Paul works for his brother, John Marvin, as a handyman, and he came there to deal with the sunflowers. Apparently, I think maybe the groundskeeper sprayed something that killed the sunflowers. They plant those to attract a certain kind of bird, I think, because they hunt birds. He said that he and Paul had rode around for 45 minutes to an hour looking at everything. Now, that's where that Snapchat video is going to come in, I believe, around that time frame when he and Alec were riding around looking at some things. Maggie had things she did in Charleston that day. She had a doctor's appointment, got back to Moselle fairly late. He couldn't remember what doctor she had seen. He said she was having some stomach issues and a tooth problem, but he did name a doctor he thought it could be. And he said it wasn't unusual for Maggie to be at the kennels that late. He said if she had been gone for a while, she comes out to let them run. When asked about cameras, he said they had deer cameras up on deer stands in the fields, but as I just talked about, nothing on the property as far as surveillance. And he said that she got back later than 6 or 7 that night, which is weird. I haven't really done this whole timeline, but if you remember, I think he said they ate dinner together around 6 at the house. They talked about in the openings how stomach contents from Paul and Maggie will show they both had eaten the same food. I don't know how that's going to come in. Maybe it'll dispute that it wasn't home cooked, or I don't know. So he came home, him and Paul messed around. He said he took a nap 25 to 30 minutes and got up, called Maggie, no answer. He left to go to his mom's. And the whole point that the state made is that why not just drive to the kennels? It's right there. If you don't get an answer from a call or a text from her or Paul, just drive down there and see what's up. He said she had told him that she may ride with him to his mom's, and he said she normally doesn't go there. And he said it's not a big deal that she didn't answer when he called and texted. When asked what time, he looked at his phone and he says 9:08. And then when he started to come back at 9:45, he says he tried to call Paul. He says, my calls are right here. He has his phone in his hand during this interview. I'll put it back on this. Oh, by the way, this is that blackout ammo, and it's huge. I mean, those things are just lethal looking. You can see just devastating damage, I'm sure. So, sorry, y'all. I'm trying to find the There we go. So there, that picture of him in the car during this interview. The officer says we're going to have a lot more questions and asks for a number. Alex says we don't have a house phone, but he gives his brother Randy and John Marvin's phone number. Boy, they're going to need to change their number because it was read out in court and broadcast for the world. I bet they're on it today if they haven't already. So the officer asks about Alex's dad being in the hospital. He said he has a lot going on and he's having a hard time. They ask where Maggie's family is, and he says they live in Somerville, which isn't super far from there. His brother had been in touch with her family at this point to tell them about the murders, but someone was going to tell them in person. He said Buster also was on his way to Moselle at the time this interview was taking place. So the officer says when you first saw Paul and tried to flip him over, was he on his back? And Alex said he was just like he is, which was face down, arms tucked. And now it's time for our paid sponsor of the week, Base. The Base Weekender bag is my new go-to for short or long trips. As you guys know, I'm on assignment now covering a trial away from home, and the Weekender bag has so much space. I actually cut down the number of bags I usually carry from 3 to 1. It even has padded space for your laptop. Are you like me and misplace your keys while on vacation? The Weekender bag has a clip inside to make sure you don't lose your keys while traveling. You got dirty clothes or shoes? Not a problem. The Weekender bag has a separate compartment on the bottom that's separate from the main compartment. The material is durable and the shoulder strap is super comfortable even when the bag is full. There are so many little nooks and crannies for all your travel needs. The bag comes in stylish colors and I chose navy. The Weekender bag was actually created by actress Shay Mitchell, and she really thought of everything a frequent traveler needs. The Weekender bag even fits in the overhead compartment on planes. In fact, I've ordered 2 for my parents for their upcoming cruise after they fell in love with mine. Make your packing more efficient and stylish with the Base Weekender bag. And guess what? Base has over 30,000 5-star reviews. So what are you waiting for? Even better, right now, Base is offering my listeners 15% off your first purchase by visiting basetravel.com/whattheworld. Go to basetravel.com/whattheworld for 15% off your first purchase. That's Base, BEIS travel.com/whattheworld. Asked if he helped Maggie out there in the field talking about Paul. Alex said he helped everyone with everything and that Moselle was Paul's absolute passion. So speaking of Paul and trying to turn him, he said, I tried to turn him. I tried to check him. I think I already knew, meaning that he was dead. Clearly, from what we've heard, unfortunately, the poor boy's brains were at his ankles. He went to the house first when he got back, and then once he saw the bodies, back to the house to get the shotgun. The officer said the coroner will take custody of those bodies. They'll do an autopsy and go from there. So Alec thanks them for everything they're doing. The officer says, we're going to be here a while. Alec's phone rings and he asks if he can answer, and he starts sobbing and saying, don't let him come up here. I think he's talking about Buster there. And he says, I think we're about done. He shakes the officer's hands and thanks them. That ends the interview. By the way, the wadding that we're going to talk about for Paul, this is the anatomy of a shotgun shell. So you have the bottom part, which is gold. Then you have the wadding, which is kind of that plastic in the middle. And then the top is where the pellets are, the buckshot or the bird shot or whatever shot. I'm not familiar with all that. Detective Retland said she listened to the 911 call, and on there he said he had seen her 2 hours ago, took a nap, went to check on his mom, and found that unusual because of the time of night. And she said Alzheimer's patients tend to be worse at night, so she just thought it was strange to go visit. He told her he tried to pull Paul and Maggie over to check for pulses on that 911 call. And then he stated the phone popped out of his pocket when he tried to check Paul's pulse, and he put it down really quickly. So she asked if he tried to turn him over, and he said he did. And then so the prosecutor asked, have you ever tried to move dead weight? And she says yes. And Alec never said in the interview that he had been down to the kennels that night. So they show crime scene photos, and Alec says he tries to turn Paul over twice, but it's clarified later. He tried to turn him over once. He said twice that he tried to turn him over. There was some confusion. Did he try to turn him over twice? But I think it was clarified yesterday. He only tried to turn him over once, but it was said twice. So it kind of confused, I think, some people of how many times he actually tried to turn him over. On this photo that they're showing to her, the witness, she's asked to tell what's around Paul, and she says blood and brain matter. And then the prosecutor says, how do you check for a pulse when Paul's hands were under him and his neck was essentially not accessible? He said he tried to lift Paul's shoulders to get to his neck. Buster looked upset at this, by the way. Alec was talking to attorneys. Her mental notes of first seeing Alec. He was clean, and in the car during the interview, his hands and arms were clean. Now, one thing to me is we know that inside the pocket of the back of Paul's shorts, they found blood. So whoever went in to get that phone had blood on their hands. So it kind of is contradictory right there to me, where he didn't have any blood on him, but there's blood inside the pocket, which I think was Velcro. So I don't know if it was closed or not. Around Paul's body, there were no footprints or knee prints around the body, according to the witness. She said his shoes were athletic shoes with no blood on them. I do have a photo of his shoes. This is a later witness, but it does show these shoes here that he was wearing when he was murdered. She assisted SLED with that search warrant. They searched ponds, stored vehicles as evidence, just all the normal things that you do when you're doing a search warrant. So on cross-exam, Jim Griffin points out to her that it was unusual for someone to see Alzheimer's patients at night. And he says, do you recall him saying his dad was put in the hospital that day? She gets anxious when he's not home. Don't criticize a son who sees his mom the day his dad was put in the hospital. And he talks about her walking around the crime scene. She said there was blood and brain matter all over the ceiling, the door. It didn't look like he blew. The prosecutor said, the defense attorney said it didn't look like he blew his son's head off. In other words, as graphic as these photos are, and I've seen portions of them from where I was sitting, I was able to see part of them. And then some have been released of inside. It's everywhere, y'all. It's everywhere. So you said he tried to turn Paul over 2 times. Was it he said he turned him over twice, or was he asked twice? Then that's where she said he was asked twice. But did you ask how he tried to turn him over? The witness said no. Did you ask how the phone popped out? Witness said no. Did you ask if he was able to turn Paul over? She said no. The defense says, as far as kneeling or footprints by Paul's body, did you do a forensic analysis to see if there's footprints around his body? And she said, well, with my eyes. And she said Paul was covered with a sheet. And he says, the defense attorney says, when you were looking at his body, you couldn't see right next to his body because of a sheet. She said the sheet was mostly on his body, not on the cement next to him. So Jim Griffin said, was it a fitted sheet? And I'm sorry, we all kind of giggled. And she said no, but it wasn't a queen sheet either. So she shot it right back at him. So he says officers lifted the sheet to see if there was a gun under him. Did you see their footprints then? And she said no. Looking at Maggie's body, there were a few clumps of hair and a broken earring located near an ATV tire that was near the bodies. So he says Alec gave SLED consent to search his property. And on tape, he said, you can do anything, look for anything. So on redirect, she's asked, you assisted SLED? Yes. On June 10th, you were with SLED and you were to meet with Alec, his brothers, his son Buster, and they all agreed to meet you. Yes. On June 12th, did you assist SLED with removing the black box out of a Chevy Suburban? And she said, yes, that's going to be Alec's car. She was with SLED when Maggie's Mercedes was towed, and all of them agreed to allow SLED to download their phones, all the content. June 16th, SLED drove to the Moselle property and the ATVs on ATVs. They just canvassed the whole property. 1,700 acres. That was with Alec's consent. Yes. They determined the tire tracks under the canopy was actually the dog caregivers. That's where he parks. Did you see water around the bodies that night? Yes. How did Paul fall? She said face down and his face hit the gravel. So on June 18th, there was a meeting that they had. There was crime scene and autopsy photos. And what they found were a few brown hairs in Maggie's hand and fingers, which is interesting because Alec has pretty much gray hair. The back of his hair still has a little hint of red. But that's interesting because I think the defense will jump on that to say they were saying there's no struggle. They didn't see any indication of a struggle. The state says that. But you find these stray hairs in her hand. Now, could it be dog hair? I don't know. Maybe we'll find out. There was an injury to Paul's face. Could that have been a struggle? She said she noticed scratches and bruising on his cheek. The white truck, by the way, on the side of the road, that belonged to John Marvin. They had switched cars, Paul and John Marvin. So there was a be on the lookout for that white truck, and it was found, processed, and ruled out as part of the crime scene. John Marvin was rushing to the scene that night, and the truck broke down. That's how that ended up on the side of the road. So June 8th, Colleton County put out a statement. There's no threat to the public. Was Alec a suspect? She said that night, everybody was a suspect. And he says, can you be more specific? And she said, we asked questions and there were just so many different scenarios that night that everybody was a suspect. They play footage showing Paul's bodies being covered, is covered with a sheet. He asked, do you see how far that sheet is on both sides of Paul's body? Was that where the sheet was when you arrived? And she said, no, I could still see the top of his head. You didn't notice any footprints of any agents there inside the kennel. She said, no, he's standing in the feed room. This is a photo we can't see. We can't see any evidence, whether it's graphic or not. And it's kind of a pain. I have not been in a trial where they don't show at least the non-graphic photos from the crime scene. But at this point, it was starting to rain, which I think is why she was saying this guy was standing in the feed room. Crime scene removed the sheet from Paul's body. So on redirect, she worked executing a search warrant on June 9th. She was present when the DNA was swabs were taken from Alec and assisted on a timeline with those phone calls. So the next witness was Delilah with SLED, crime scene investigations. She did the buccal swabs on Paul and Maggie's bodies and collected Paul's cell phone at the scene. It was an iPhone with a clear case, and Buster really stared at that phone with a very sad face when they brought it out. So on cross exam, they got the cell June 8th, and she can't remember whether the phone was powered up or not. It was taken to the SLED lab. So Harpootlian says cells can receive info or erase memory at any point when you're trying to preserve evidence. Do you turn it off or on? She says, no, I didn't. There's a Faraday bag, which is something that you put a phone that's of evidentiary value to an investigation in, so no one can access it and can't receive and erase data. Did you know that? And he said they were not done the normal way. And she said, well, they gave it to me to take to the SLED lab. Harpootlian said, nobody told you to put it in the Faraday bag, not that bag. You put it in the brown paper bag. And then he said, there's a passcode. Do you know where that came from? And the witness says, I didn't write it. And he says, you weren't asked to handle this cell any differently if you had been given a can of pork and beans, right? Everybody kind of giggles. She said, it depends on if the pork and beans were evidence. He said, so assume it's evidence. Did they give you any direction how to handle that phone? And she said it was collected with gloves and transported to SLED. The next witness is Amanda Worley. Buster turned to John Marvin when she comes walking up, and they kind of have an exchange back and forth. I don't know if it's related to her or not, but she's crime scene investigation with SLED. She responded to Moselle around 12:07 a.m. They were notified at 10:33 p.m. in Columbia to respond to the Moselle address. She said there's a gravel path between the kennels and the hangar. When she got there, it was lightly raining and they had already put a tent over Maggie's body. Remember, Paul's body was pretty much covered with that awning where he fell. She got the shotgun from Sergeant Green's car, the one that Alec had brought down, and the gun was loaded. So she unloaded it before transporting it for safety reasons, obviously. And as we know, there was 16 gauge and 12 gauge loaded in there. She also took possession of the buckle swab Sergeant Green got from Alec, and they did that to compare DNA to the shotgun to know it was his DNA on that gun since he admitted to touching it. She saw Paul's body. When she got there, it was still under the sheet. So they photographed the area, the body, before the sheets were removed. At this point, Alec's crying again in court. The coroner removed the sheet, and then they took photos of the bodies, took photos of the footwear impressions from Maggie, photos of the door into the feed room. She said there was a shotgun wad on the floor and blood, tissue, skull fragments. There was the hole in the window where clearly some buckshot or something went through there. The feed room door had some of Paul's blood and hair on it at the top. Behind the door, there were 2 12-gauge shotgun shells and foot impressions. The bloody footprints were compared to the shoes that Paul was wearing that night, and they matched. They showed where they had made impressions of those shoes with ink and compared them to the ones in the feed room. At this point, Buster wiped his eyes. The shoes were facing the window. So to me, like, I assume when Paul was shot, we know they said he was kind of slightly tipped over, his head dipped. He must have turned around. And that's when he was shot in the back of the head, is what I'm guessing, because she said those shoe impressions were pointed towards the window. So the outside door had blood and brain matter. There were 6 defects in that window in the feed room. They were swabbed for touch DNA, and they also gathered shotgun pellets in that room. After Paul's body was removed, they processed that feed room entirely. So for Maggie, they took photos with a pink sheet on her. Her body was under that tent or canopy. Her arms were bent at the elbow, with her right arm bent to her face. Left arm was bent under her body, and her legs were straight out. The body was removed, and they found one of those blackout casings under her right knee. They also collected other shell casings, logged those, sent them off for analysis. At this point, a couple of jurors started nodding. This might have been when we got a stand break. There was a defect in the gravel and also some metal fragments around her. There was a defect in the side of the doghouse, and 2 ATVs were parked in that shed, and there was biological material on front of the ATV near Maggie's left side. Crime scene made sketches to show where things were located around the crime scene. And they also photographed the tire impressions that were in the grass. They collected the gunshot residue kit from Alec taken by Colleton County. So Alec's car, the Chevy Suburban, they processed that on June the 9th. They found a 16-gauge unfired shell on the floorboard. She swabbed a lot of areas in the vehicle for blood, such as the unlock button, the steering wheel, the floorboard, the seatbelt, the front passenger door, armrest, front of the passenger seat back, driver's door, all that. They bring out the entire seatbelt in court, by the way. And Maggie's car, they swabbed the interior and exterior door releases just from the driver's side door. She attended the autopsies and got fingernail clippings from both Paul and Maggie, got their clothes. And for Maggie, she got projectile fragments, Paul shotgun pellets, and waddings from his shoulder and head, and plastic wadding from the armpit area. All that was transferred to the SLED lab. Back at the lab, she found an additional shotgun pellet in Paul's clothing. So Alec's clothing, they tested that t-shirt and shorts for blood. As you know, that's still an outstanding ruling whether or not they're going to allow this in, due to the fact that the shirt was destroyed and the defense did not get to test it on their own or photograph it. Also, there's that discrepancy, they say, where the expert changed his testimony, but we shall see if that comes in. Ultimately, there were several areas of staining with a presumptive positive for blood, several on the front, some on the back of the shirt, some on the shorts, front and back as well. They photographed it, labeled the stains, took more photos, and she explains that the chemical they use to detect blood, LCV, will oxidize, and that's what turns it purple. We know that that's a big part of this filing by the defense to keep this out. There was another search warrant months later, September 13th of 2021, of the Moselle property. The main focus was the gun room on the first floor. There's also a cabin near the kennels and a workshop. There's just lots of ammo in that gun room, as you can imagine. There's a whole bookcase that's just an ammo bookcase. There was 300 blackout ammo in that bookcase. Desk in the living room of the cabin had 300 blackout ammo. Ammo in the workshop, one unfired shell in Paul's bedroom, by the way. So we got to the end of the day there, and ultimately Harpootlian said that cross-exam is going to take several hours. So the judge broke for the day. This is going to be interesting next week. I'm really interested for the medical examiner to testify. That's always an interesting thing for me, although we kind of know from the filing the week before last by the defense, their expert, about the trajectory of the shots and what it hit and that kind of thing. I mean, ultimately, their wounds were just so bad to the head that there was no chance at all, obviously, for them to survive. A couple of the other shots they could have survived, possibly. It wouldn't have been instantly fatal. But just a devastating crime scene, devastating what happened to Paul and Maggie. And I've said it before, Paul wasn't perfect. He did a lot of pretty lame things in his life and seemed pretty entitled. But what happened to Paul that night is tragic, and just, hopefully we will get to the bottom of it and that jury will make the right decision, whatever they think it is. So that's it, guys. I will see you guys Monday from Colleton County. I'll be back in that courtroom all day. Anjanette Levy's coming to hang out for the week. I'm so excited. We may do a live one night or something. I don't know. We're going to try to make it fun, and I'm excited to learn from her. Elizabeth and Josh taught me so much last week, and I'm super excited to learn even more from such a seasoned pro like Anjanette Levy, who is super nice and fun to be with, and can't wait. But in the end, we're going to keep getting the facts of this case and bringing it to you. If you don't subscribe to my channel, podcast, everything. Also, Law and Crime. They are airing that hour-long Q&A every lunch period. Every time that court goes in recess for lunch, I run outside as fast as I can, get my earpiece in, and we do it for an hour. So you can watch that on YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, everywhere, or also on their regular channel on TV. So check it out. We are all working together to bring you everything coming out of that courtroom. For those of you who can't watch, don't want to watch, and remember, every night I'll have a nightly recap of that day's testimony. Sometimes it's slow to upload, but I'm trying to get it out to you as quick as I can. So you guys have a good rest of your weekend. I'll see you Monday from the courthouse. Have a good one.